Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Co-op Chat podcast. My name is Jordan Adams and I am joined by...
Hi, I am Scott Robertson.
That is Scott Robertson. The first episode today we'll be talking about Silent Hill 2. Scott, what is your sort of first experience with the game?
It was... I remember I got it not long after I first got PlayStation 2, which is great. My family was completely responsible when I was younger. Got me Splinter Cell, Silent Hill, and Resident Evil, so that was a great start. But I've got the copy here, actually. Director's cut of the game, which is currently in pieces. But, yeah, I remember sort of playing about 2 hours of it initially when I was younger, and I knocked down an enemy, and then when it scuttled away on the floor, I shat myself, and I must have just stopped playing for a year.
Yeah, that was sort of my first experience was with that enemy. Yeah. I think they came under it was like a van near one of the objectives. It just crawls out. I think it's called the mannequin. I think that's what it's called. Pretty sure.
Yeah.
So my first experience was with the PS3 port, the really bad PS3 port, the HD one. Sort of, Hijinks Studio was the people behind that. They were left with this sort of incomplete code by Konami. They sort of left them to in the mud, I guess. They had to handle technical issues from the PS2 version, and then it was just a massive failure, wasn't it? The fog, they screwed
massively.
up, didn't they? The new voice actors you...
Complete lack of fog.
Yeah. The new voice actors you were going on about before, if you want to go into that.
Yeah. So, for some reason, they decided what would be a good idea is Konami decided to be cheapskates, and instead of paying the original voice actors for Silent Hill 2 and 3, what they did was they ripped the old audio files from the original game and used that, and the remastered audio was done by a completely different cast and crew, cheap cast and crew that. So instead of it sounding weird and otherworldly like the original version of Silent Hill 2, we instead got this subpar student budget quality, and it was I wouldn't say it was bad, it just made everything bland. And it was not needed.
I've got a sort of a weird story. I got Jack to play this, the HD collection, right? And his first experience with it, he's walking down the path towards Silent Hill, and then he gets to the ranch. I don't know if you remember, but the first thing he sees is Comic Sans. That's the first thing he sees, and the first thing he picks up on. And he sort of picks out, and I never even noticed this before, but they on the Silent Hill Ranch sign, they replaced the original text with Comic Sans for some odd reason. I don't know why. I'll send you a picture later, but it's honestly so bizarre. I don't understand. It's like a massive joke, and sort of going into the start of the game, like I just said then, what did you feel for the sort of first hour or so? What were you, not sort of your thoughts, but what were your sort of feelings inside your chest and whatnot?
Yeah. Mainly anxiousness. It was the first time I played a Silent Hill game where my feelings towards the game were fairly up in the air. I haven't quite experienced anything like it since, and even when I go back to it now, the that first hour so eerie to me. I think that out of anything else in the game, it's the most disconcerting part for me. Even when you get all of the upfront knowledge and all the information about all these characters, where they come from and what's happening with them, the uncertainty you feel when you're playing that first hour is it's unlike any other game.
And I get that right away. The same feeling when you're in the bathroom. James is looking at himself, the main protagonist, and then you sort of start walking up to the sound. I get this sort of anxious feeling. I sort of get this sort of, it's like weirdly claustrophobic, like a tight chest.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's feel it like I know something bad's gonna happen, I guess. And then you get to sort of like the first enemy, the lion figure, I think it's called, and then you have to get I think it's the weapon, the pipe, I think. Your first weapon.
I think it's like a plank of wood. He like snaps it off and drags it out.
And you sort of get that to sort of defeat this enemy. So I got the exact same sort of like feelings as you. And what did you sort of think for the first hour or so? So what were you thinking? What was going through your mind?
The great thing about the opening to Silent Hill 2 is that the more you... it's one of those games where you will play it and your initial first experience of the game will be... well, I mean, I suppose it'll be slightly different now because a lot of people have preconceptions about the game. We live in a world where everyone's going to know everything about the game before they play it, but... originally, if you go into this game without knowing anything, the first hour, you don't really have a lot to go on, unless you've played like the original Silent Hill. But even then, this changes things up so much that even to play to that game, the first hour of this game is this. It's like having, it's like having like a vivid dream, almost. Yeah. And it's not just to do with the cutscenes, the acting, and all that sort of stuff, but it's more to do with like the area of itself. Everything seems to be colourful, bright, and vibrant, but at the same time, it's dark, grey, and desolate. It matches these weird parallels between everything, and that includes the gameplay for the first hour as well.
Yeah.
You're walking and running fairly quickly, but the way James's animation moves makes everything seem like it's in like a dream animation or something like that. And then by the time you get to like the graveyard for the first time, everything just slowly starts to ease it in. I think like the perfect way to describe the road leading to Silent Hill, it is almost like you're on a bus and you're being taken deeper and deeper and deeper into the themes of this game, and the graveyard is like almost like the gates to this place. It's almost like, okay, this is where you're slowly going to feel what we want you to feel with this game. Beforehand it was sort of like, but now you're in.
And then quite literally, you do literally go deeper and deeper and deeper. You see James, when you get to the prison, you're going down, you're jumping down these holes. I don't know what, he's obviously suicidal, that's obviously some of the main themes. But it's you are digging deeper into this sort of mystery, because you're obviously the plot. You're looking for your wife. She's sort of left you a letter, but the thing is, she's dead essentially. So you're looking for her, but you're sort of like you're finding other things as well. You're finding other characters. You just find out about this town that James thought was sort of like innocent and escapable when he was with Mary in back in the day. To go with these like sort of thoughts and feelings would be the soundtrack. That's the next thing I want to move on to. I thought the soundtrack was beautiful. I thought it subverts the typical sort of horror soundtrack that you'd find in like Resident Evil or whatnot, but it also conforms to sort of horror as well. What did you think about the soundtrack?
Yeah, so I have this constant battle in my head of Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3 in terms of their soundtracks, because they both serve their purpose well, and it's more to do with unlike other games where they might have like sweeping orchestrals or something like that. This game it's not a soundtrack for the game, it's a soundtrack for James, and not many games tend to do that. Like sometimes you'll get like a theme for each character, and you do get that here, but it feels more like the soundtrack is weaved around what James perceives these themes to be. Laura's theme is hands down like one of the best songs in any medium ever.
Akira Yamaoka.
But it's like hats off to him. He stuck around with Silent Hill for such a long time. I think that it was I think it was Shattered Memories. So he stayed with them up until Homecoming, from what I remember, and returned for Downpour. But he is hands down the best person for these series of games, and I'm glad that they kept him on for so long.
Yeah, definitely. He sort of like, he came from Team Silent, didn't he? And he sort of like kept this legacy going even when Team Silent were gone. So he sort of like kept this whole series going with his music. The tracks in this game, at least the soft, the layered tracks, they're excellently composed as well. For me, my favourite is Magdalene, I think it's called. It's accompanied by a scene in the game. I think you remember when James is in the elevator. Do you remember that scene?
Yeah.
That's following the death of Maria, isn't it? So it's basically...
I've got a fun story about that scene that we can get to in a bit.
Yeah. It's simple, it's sad, the tempo is up and down, and it like you said, it reflects James's current emotions. He's obviously distraught, he's down, he's defeated, deflated, depressed, heartbroken. Essentially, even though he didn't watch his wife die, he is essentially watching his wife die again. Spoilers.
Again.
But obviously he feels useless, helpless, and also, I think the music makes the scene as well. It gives it emotion. There's feelings, there's heart, and then on the opposite side to this like sort of these beautiful moments, there's like these other punishing tracks. So there's Silent Heaven is my other favorite. It's that sort of punishing.
Yeah.
It's like a nightmare. It's like relentless, and I think it's there before you enter the town. It sort of sets the scene, sets the atmosphere, and it's just not forgiving. And
it's like pins and needles everywhere as you listen to that track.
And it also reflects the symbolism of James's punishment. So with Pyramid Head, sort of what are your other sort of thoughts? What are your other sort of favourites that you remember from the game?
Track names come and go, but I really like that first initial track. I think that I'm always the first scene in the entire game.
Yeah.
James looks up for a second, looks into the mirror. That first opening track is always going to stick with me, and I think it's because that sudden change. You listen to it and it sounds quite calming, almost like the kind of thing that you put on to like meditate to or something like that. But then when the angle shifts and you see James from a side, as he's lifting up his head, the track then changes, and then all of a sudden you get what was once this nice soothing low track just shoots up high, and then it's almost as if to go, oh shit, something's not quite right here. And in retrospect, when you watch that scene and you listen to that track again, it's something that a lot of games and films do with their soundtracks, where they will often use they'll often use a low track and then go high for the sake of the reveal of a villain or something like that. And I'm sure we're going to talk about it later on, but that's parallel on a second or third playthrough with that track. That's one of the reasons why that sticks in my head.
Sort of like with sound, there's also sound effects. You got the walking, sort of like footsteps. I think they use in certain areas they use like broken glass. I don't know how they did it, but there's obviously crunching of broken glass. It's just these different sounds. You obviously got the sounds of the monsters as well. You got the sound of the radio as well. I remember that vividly because as soon as you hear that, you know that there's something there. You know that there's like a monster there, and it's just gonna come for you. You don't know where it's gonna be, but you know it's gonna be there. And it's the sound effects,
so freaky.
And there's just other things like not even the soundtrack. There's the sort of the if you're in like the prison or something, again going back to the prison, you can hear like these like low like moans and like these different sounds around you. It's these environmental sort of like things that make you feel like you're just sort of, you're not alone. You're definitely not alone. And then obviously you'll find something later on that's going to come get you.
The two well, technically there's 4 of them, but the cage rooms in the prison.
Yeah.
Even when there's nothing in there, you will still hear very, very silent, like, moans in there. And I believe they recorded that in stereoscope.
Right.
So it's meant to sound like that shit's coming from right behind you as well as in front of you. And it's very vague, but I remember there being multiple times where you walk through the empty room, the empty hall, and thinking there's got to be a monster in here somewhere. There has to be at some point, and there isn't. But they kept the sound effects from the previous room into that one just to mess with you.
And the sounds, and then moving on to sounds, I sort of like wanted to talk about characters at the James Sunderland. What do you think about him? What do you think about his sort of character? Do you think he's fleshed out? Do you think he's like sort of like a vehicle for the gamers or the players to sort of like position themselves in his body, or do you think he's more fleshed out than
that? I definitely think he's more fleshed out than that, because this is something that I didn't quite get until more recently, after studying so many games and films for a while. You start to get into the idea of what a protagonist means to its story, and then you can sort of place on who a protagonist is in that story. And Silent Hill 2 has done something which I like. You could maybe argue some weird non-linear films do it, but I haven't seen it done the way Silent Hill does it. I have a belief that the protagonist in Silent Hill 2 isn't James, but rather the player. The revelations that unfold around James's character, it's not like the game goes, here's this big moment involving James's character, and then James realizes it. We know it a long time before James ever learns it, and I think that only adds to James's character when the game knows that the plot and the structure needs to keep up the player rather than the protagonist, because then you realise that, oh no, James is a far more complex character than you can possibly imagine, because it's about him accepting the information that we as the player have learned, and he doesn't serve as an unreliable narrator because of that, which is why it's hard to put him in the ballpark. It's more to do with he's sort of like, he's the book we're reading.
Yeah.
We are the reader, and he is the book for the game, and I think that's going to be one of the many reasons why a lot of players are drawn to him. He's our mystery. He's the guy we're trying to solve out, and Silent Hill plays second back to that.
Sort of going to his own like sort of design. They take his green jacket. They take a lot of inspiration from. It's literally sort of like the same jacket from Jacob's Ladder. I don't know if you've seen that film.
Yeah.
And
a lot of inspiration from that.
There's inspiration from that. There's obviously symbolism. There's obviously parallels there between James's story and sort of Jacob's story in that one, in the self-realization. If you get me. Obviously, I don't want to go too much into Jacob's Ladder because we're talking about Silent Hill 2. But if you've watched Jacob's Ladder, then you'll see quite clearly the similarities there. And then there's also other symbolism, sort of with or like parallels with is it Solaris? The film Solaris.
Yeah.
with the sort of plot in that is similar, isn't it? With James's sort of wife in that. I haven't seen Solaris myself, but I definitely know that there is massive parallels, and I know that Team Silent took a lot of
there's a
lot of inspiration from that. And how do you think Team Silent like sort of uses inspiration sort of to make their own thing? Because obviously they've used this to inspire other people with their like sort of characters in this game, and then you can see it obviously in like indie games and whatnot now.
Well, I going back to right, so I'm not going to linger on to this, but going back to Jacob's Ladder, something that I really, really, if you want a really obvious way of like Team Silent's excellent handling of something like taking a theme from something like that as inspiration versus another team doing that, look no further than Homecoming, where the opening isn't just inspired from Jacob's Ladder, it is Jacob's Ladder. They legit rip off the hospital scene and the idea in that scene of that game is to try and get you to see the parallels and feel the same things as that film, but Silent Hill 2 doesn't take it doesn't take it like that. It takes the themes, it takes
the ideas,
extracts, and then it sees how it can inject it into the world. So like the Otherworld, for example, this rustic metal sort of like the creepiness about something like that in like Jacob's Ladder when he goes into a hell areas, because it looks all drugged. It's like everything's freaking out. And Silent Hill 2 managed to take the idea of, okay, how can we really, really unsettle our players in a similar fashion, but without doing that straight up. And they use that idea of like, okay, but in Jacob's Ladder he can still see the world for the way it is, even if it's twisted. So they use that here. The more unsettling moments of this game are just moments where you just stop and look at it. You just realise where you are and what's happening, and I think that in terms of like what they're going for, it's really bang on. I can't think of like anything that's too much like, oh no, this is directly ripped off from this, but a lot of biblical stuff in there as well, if you wanted to go for that angle, but thankfully not as much later entries.
And even previous, like in the first, this sort of story is it's disconnected completely from the sort of the first and the third games, which are like the continuation. The third game is the continuation of the first, and there's obviously connections there between Harry and Heather, but this one this is a lot more personal. This is James's story, this is no one else's story, but it also takes other sort of characters, and then these characters I want to get into next. There's Angela and Eddie. Angela's sort of looking for her mum. You first find her in, is it the graveyard? I'm pretty sure she's obviously looking over some grave, and you find her, and she's already immediately jumpy. She is surprised by your presence. She doesn't know that anyone's there other than you. But we find out that obviously she's been sort of sexually abused by her father. She plans to commit suicide. But she's also sort of in Silent Hill for the same similar reasons to sort of James. He's looking for someone, and she's obviously looking for someone. So there's parallels there. And then obviously we've got Eddie. We find out he's sort of mentally disturbed. We sort of learn that he was bullied for his weight. It sort of pushed him over the edge, sort of, and it led to him killing a dog. And then we sort of get a glimpse into Angela and Eddie's world. I don't know if you remember, Angela's world is sort of like this fiery hellscape, and obviously everything she sees is on fire.
Angela and Eddie are perhaps the most fascinating characters in any Silent Hill game. Primarily because they utilize them in ways that a lot of people it probably dove over their heads. But for Angela, she serves as this prepper for James's story.
Yeah.
So, for example, when you see her for the first time in the graveyard, when she says she's looking for a mother, you can already, like, first-time players can already go, oh, okay, I can sort of see where this is going. This is a Silent Hill game. She's at a graveyard and looking for this. And it sort of sets your mind up for later on when when James mentioned that his wife has died, you sort of use your prerequisite of that scene and Angela's story, and you can insert it into the idea of what James is doing. Eddie's very similar in the sense that obviously he's got some demons of his own that he's been dealing with throughout the entire game, but a small not a small detail, it's as large as you want to see it pretty much, but everyone's got their own personalised monster, and something that I really, really, really like about Eddie's character is when you realise that he snaps, you come to realise the reason why Eddie doesn't have a monster is because he is the monster. He is the guy who is messing about with himself. He is his own demon, and when you come to that realization, I think it's one of the better moments of the game. It adds a lot of character to a person who only has I think it's about 4 scenes in the entire game, but he still leaves an impact that's insanely large.
And with Eddie, there's obviously when you get to his sort of world, I guess, so what he sees, you see a lot of dead people scattered everywhere. You can see what he's thinking. He obviously wants to kill someone, but he's obviously he's not actually killed anyone. All these things you see around, they're not actually people. You obviously then get into the boss fight room, which is sort of like an ice cold sort of meat locker, and it's sort of like a symbolism of food, but also death, with all the carcasses hanging down. And then for Angela, it's obviously fire is everywhere. So there's two different differences. There's two differences there. There's obviously the ice, and then there's the fire, and there's obviously the ice is obviously death, and the fire is obviously hatred. So there's like two different sort of things going on there. You can obviously see two different characters sort of clashing together when you sort of like enter their world and you see what's wrong with them.
Yeah.
With Angela, she's when you see her on the stairs and she's about to go up, and then you obviously think she's obviously going to commit suicide. She says, "For me, it's always like this," and that sort of confirms the theory that you've going on about the everyone's got their own demons and everyone sees what they see. But we also go into another part. I think it's slightly before with the abstract daddy boss, and that's sort of there's more similarities there with James. James obviously has his own sort of like boss monster sort of coming after him, his own demon coming after him in Pyramid Head, who obviously is there to sort of punish him, make him realise that what he's done wrong. So what do you think about Pyramid Head? What do you think about his design? What do you think about his sort of influences? And do you think he's overused? Do you think he's overused in the franchise? Because obviously he's supposed to be sort of James's demons and no one else's.
The idea of iconography is something that I think Konami lean a little too far into. Pyramid Head is the image for Silent Hill 2 because of James. When you learn who and what Pyramid Head is, or at least when you get an inkling of what he is, you realise that the writers of that game intended for him to be an extremely personal monster. I mean, the way I see what Konami did later on is now I love Silent Hill 3, but I think they took the wrong message away from Silent Hill 3, with that being they inserted monsters from Silent Hill 2 into 3, but Silent Hill 3 got away with it. Because they were a different interpretation of those monsters. You see the nurses, for instance, instead of them looking sexualized in Silent Hill 3, they're wild, they're monstrous, they're like demonic almost, to suit in with the character of Heather in that game. But here in 2, obviously they are more of an interpretation of what James views his demons to be, which is something that I really like about Pyramid Head. James. So, I know that the theory is that these monsters are demons from James's mind, or at least they are James's personality personified as monsters. But the way I've always seen them is it's what James believes his monsters to be. And that works really great with the optional endings towards the end, because if you went for something a little bit lighter, then the idea of James thinking worse about himself than what has actually happened fits well with the story. But so does the idea of him wanting to commit suicide and him actually doing wrong. The idea of the monsters being just as much of an interpretation for James as the player works really well in getting us connected to the protagonist as much as the game. And that's why Pyramid Head works beautifully. But I do have a funny story about Pyramid Head briefly. That elevator scene where Maria dies. So before that you have to run down the hallway away from Pyramid Head. I didn't know that. I saw a hallway and I was too busy running down it beforehand. By the time I went to the elevator, this was in normal mode. If you're in hard, he will speed up drastically. But in normal mode, I was already running at this point. So I went all the way down to the elevator and the music picked up and I went, shit, there must be something after me. But I couldn't see anything. So I made it to the elevator without Pyramid Head showing up. And then all of a sudden, I just turned around. Maria's got like a blade stabbed in her. I'm like, oh, that's Pyramid Head. What the fuck are you doing here?
That actually happened to me as well. I didn't even know he was there at the first start, and he just sort of appears out of nowhere and just happened. And then he's obviously just destroys Maria. Getting on to Maria as well. I haven't got any notes about her really, but she's sort of like what James wants to see in his wife, I guess. What he wants to see.
So, the way I've always seen Maria is that she is James's mental protector. It's sort of like the teddy bear you had when you were young, or something like that you can't let go. As long as it's there, you always feel safe, and that's sort of like James's version of that. It's just that she's become a parasite. Maria's character. Beforehand, when you something that I really like about Silent Hill 2 and the way Team Silent made Silent Hill 2, and a lot of this has to do with Maria, is the fact that it's so separate from the original. However, for fans that wanted there to be some connection, Born with a Wish, a scenario that's entirely about Maria, actually does have some links with the original game, and you can connect them together. There's a cult member in that section, but the game itself is standalone, and Maria works as a sort of great link between James and something being off. I mean, it's sort of like that, like Chekhov's gun. There's a device that someone's been handed, so they have to use it. The second you see Maria, because James instantly goes, "You're like my wife. You look exactly like Mary." Your mind instantly goes, "Oh well, she has to be evil then. She has to be bad." But no, that's not the case whatsoever. But the game plays with that perception. Mary's such a fascinating character to me on that grounds alone, because there's an entire character hidden in a first playthrough because you're too busy going, "There's something wrong about her," and you play it again the second time around. You go, she's a really sympathetic character. There is a lot going on there that she's got no control over, and that really that just adds to everything overall. The story with James and his wife, it does miles for that, including with the final encounter, which we'll talk about later on. But the idea of like, you have no idea if at this point that is Maria or Mary.
Yeah.
You don't know who it is anymore, and that's the point. It's done beautifully. Maria's character is the perfect vessel for James going from location to location.
And that's the thing. She's not actually Mary. She's not one of these sort of like manifestations. She's actually an actual character, and some people might not actually know that, but she does have her own thoughts and feelings. We find more about that in the DLC, the Born from a Wish DLC, where you actually get to play as her. And there's just a lot of interesting things that she is sort of like. She's sort of like I can't remember the word now. She is a character in herself, so obviously she's gonna have her own thoughts and feelings. Yeah, she's
sentient.
Yeah, she is sentient. Yeah, that's the word. She isn't sort of like one of these manifestations that's there just for James. She is that she is there because she is her own sort of character.
She starts out. The idea of her being born when James entered her town, it doesn't necessarily mean that she is her own person. But then that in itself opens up a whole can of worms. If you start thinking about Maria as her own character, then Pyramid Head is a monster that is hunting down James, as well as like abusing all these women, because that's James's perception of that entire thing. But then at the same time, you have to think: is Pyramid Head actually doing this of his own accord at the moment? Is this something where he was born out of this desire? So, for example, Maria was born out of James's desire to see Mary again. Was Pyramid Head born out of James's desire to punish himself? And then the idea of Pyramid Head going off and abusing all of these nurses and mannequins is a side effect, because that's what James views his person as, and it's created a character in and of itself with their own thoughts and feelings.
And then moving on from the characters, have we missed any characters? I'm trying to think. There's Laura as well. Do you want to get on to Laura? Want to speak a little about her?
Yeah, she is. She's perhaps every person's first playthrough of this. Every person's biggest question mark. I feel a lot of people are going to be playing this game for the first time, and they're going to be, whilst the mystery between James and his wife is an interesting one, for the majority of the game it's fairly cut and dry. You know that she's died. You're more just playing the game to get to the point when James realises this. Obviously it becomes a lot more complicated towards the end, and that's what makes James such a great character. But for the majority of the game, the driving point is actually Laura. Maria's need to look after Laura is a big part of what takes you from location to location in this game. And then eventually, after the elevator scene where Maria dies, you realise that inherent need to look after Laura has passed on to James. He believes that if he views Maria as his wife, if her wife's wish was to look after this girl, then it is his wish to do that in her memory. So going after her, that's really good. Even if she is a stuck-up, spoiled brat in the first half of this game.
True.
I do think that when you get to the hotel towards the end, they do some really good stuff in humanising her character, and you realise exactly where she's coming from. And the whole idea of her having the letters to begin with was a fantastic idea to link this character into James's story. She's not just a character who's wound up in Silent Hill the same way everyone else is, but she went there of her own free will. The reason why she's not seeing the shit around her is because she has nothing to do with it. She didn't do anything. She's there because she's looking for someone that she truly misses, and that moved me quite a bit.
And we were talking about Angela's and Eddie's sort of demons and what they see. What she sees is a lot more sort of innocent, and that sort of like plays upon the childhood innocence sort of aspect. She doesn't see these monsters; she sees people. I think they do confirm this when I think James asks her, do you see these monsters? And she just turns around and says, what monsters and whatnot. So
what monsters?
Yeah, and I think that's sort of interesting to sort of show that not everyone has demons, and especially just children as well. That's sort of like a another sort of like aspect as well. And then I was gonna also move on to other like sort of like enemies as well. So it's like you talked about the nurses and mannequins before. They're sort of like manifestations of James's repressed sort of sexuality, isn't it? Sort of like Mary in the hospital. Yeah. There's like different like hospital themed sort of monsters. So like nurses, like I said, but obviously they're sexualized, and then there's like differences in this and the other two Silent Hill 1 and 3 as well, which obviously does have like other symbolism as well related to Alessa.
Yeah.
And then I was going to move on to gameplay next. It's not the best, but it's also not the worst either. I suppose it's okay.
I've grown to it. I feel like that. The problem which I have is it's like a great parallel for the Silent Hill franchise is the same gameplay evolution of something like Mario. You start just by running and jumping.
Mm-hmm.
The original Silent Hill game, you start with just the basics, and then as the games went on, they started to add more and more until eventually that style became sort of its own thing. I think my issue with Silent Hill 2's gameplay isn't that it's inherently bad. It's not. It's just that I'm so used to future entries, which, give or take, like that's a good or a bad thing. In Silent Hill 3 and 4, like I think the gameplay was improved quite a bit. So when you move on to 3 and 4, and then you go back to 2, there are a lot of things that you feel a little bit weirded out by, like the attack animations, for example. Heather's quite fluid. She's quite a fast hitter.
Yeah.
Whereas, but I mean, it fits it.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
It's meant to be sluggish because James is the everyman. Yeah.
And so
he's not meant to be this.
No. Heather's obviously a lot younger, and she's a lot, I guess, fitter as well. She's James never been in a situation before. Heather picks up a lot quicker. I think that is it's sort of that's meant to be. That's what Team Silent I think wants the sort of gameplay, even if people think it may be sort of bad. I think that is the actual point. I think it's supposed to like fit the characters.
Yeah, I don't think it's bad necessarily. I mean, if I have to look at like even like the combat system in Silent Hill 1 works for what it is. It's just it's something you have to get used to, and I feel like that there are a few games out there that a lot of people inherently go into it and think that it's going to be a bad experience. Just from the first few minutes, but it's one of those things where as you go into it and you realise, oh no, the idea of like having to actually stop dead still before you can hit an enemy, and yes, you can walk forward and backwards, but you're a lot more slow, tells you that, look, combat is a thing in this game, but it doesn't mean that the game's putting too much of an emphasis on it yet. I feel like there are a lot of moments in the first half of the game, especially, where you can probably get throughout the entire first half of this game as a first-time player without taking a shot.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're a second-time player, you can get through pretty much the entire thing, with the exception of 2 boss fights, without taking a shot. So, I think that it's like a wine. It improves with age.
Yeah, definitely.
The more you play it, the more you appreciate it.
And again, they sort of want you to be. It forces you to be conservative with ammo. It plays upon that whole survival horror thing. It wants you to feel scared and alone, helpless. These are all things that are meant to be. They're there to force you to sort of have these sort of feelings.
Unless you play survival horror games like I do. In which case, every single... I've got this weird problem with inventory inventory management survival horror games. I did this in the original Resident Evil games. I did this in Resident Evil 7 Remake 2, and I've done this in all the Silent Hill games to date. I will, more often than not, observe a scene and then find a path around it without having to take a shot. Or I will try and use melee weapons and conserve ammo as much as possible. So much so that because I didn't play Silent Hill 2 for so long, in my last playthrough, I ended up having more shotgun slugs than handgun ammo by the end of the game. Which sort of trivializes it, but if you are going for the game for the first time and you're playing something like this for the first time, ammo is it is exactly how you expect it to be. It's not everywhere. It's in a few select locations, and even then you're not going to find a lot of it. Your first instinct in playing a game like this is to defend yourself, so the second you get a handgun, you are going to want to take out everything in your path to make it a lot easier. But that's the point of this game. It's like an uphill battle. You're going to start down below, and you're going to have all of your stamina. You're going to have quite a bit of handgun ammo, and as you're going through the game, it's going to get scarcer and scarcer until eventually you get towards the end, and you're going to want to rethink about a few things you've done at the start, with things like shotgun ammo, the rifle, handgun ammo. Even there's even an opportunity to miss a upgraded pipe later on in the game as well, and Pyramid Head's weapon, which I still never... I've always collected in every playthrough, but I've never used to this day. It's like, what's the point? I've got the shotgun now. I know what I'm doing.
And with going to that, there's one of the early boss fights with Pyramid Head. He just doesn't take damage, and if you're a first-time player, like you say, you're going to waste a lot of ammo on that, and I think that's supposed to... that's supposed to make first-time players waste their ammo, so it makes it a lot harder, a lot more scarier, I guess, when they have.
There is a limit. I think it's something like 32 shots, and then he can go away. But no, you learn very quickly that you're not meant to kill everything in this game, which is great. In typing up something on survival horror games very recently, I compared the actions of Silent Hill to something like Outlast. Outlast in a negative light and Silent Hill in a positive light, where I don't particularly like the idea of being completely defenseless. You know, if I'm in a scary situation, there's a chair nearby, I'm going to lunge for the chair. But what Silent Hill does is it gives you that perfect balance of like, look, we're going to give you tools to defend yourself. That doesn't mean that you're going to be able to. That doesn't mean you should be able to, and that doesn't mean you'll want to be able to. Some situations are just going to be too much. You're going to get too many nurses down the hallway, for instance, so you're going to get Pyramid Head lurking around the corner, and you'll just know, no, I can't deal with this. The best option here is just to run away. And Pyramid Head at the peak of his strength in that first encounter with him, well, not the first, but the first boss encounter with him, is that in a nutshell. You can waste all of your ammo. You can. There is a way to get rid of him with your ammo, but on repeat playthroughs, you know how much you're going to need that ammo later on. So ducking and weaving around his attacks is a much more viable option.
And I still found it engaging. There's no QTEs.
100%.
There's no QTEs, quick time events. This is before, like, sort of like I think some PS2 games had it, but this was
God of War.
God of War,
I think, was around at this time.
So I think you feel a lot more in control, and it feels a lot less like a game, I guess, because you don't see these like prompts on the screen, and it's the same with you don't have any HUD as well. There's no like health. You have to check on the pause screen for your health, and I think that sort of adds to the sort of like realism and the sort of
the pause screen freaked me out so much when I was younger. It was the first time when I think I experienced the pause screen where normally if you're scared of a game or something like that, your first instinct during a jump scare, when you're a bit newer to horror games, was to pause the game. You can't get away from it. You pause the game and you've still got that little screen showing you exactly what's happening. If there's this big giant monster coming after you, if there's a series of nurses that have just jump scared you and you instantly pause the game to take a breath, you look at that screen and it's like, I still have to deal with that. The game is showing me I have to deal with that. And yeah, I can't think of many games that do that besides from like the transparent boxes and all that sort of stuff these days. But back then, that was really freaky.
I know there's Fatal Frame that uses the pause screen to sort of jump scare you, doesn't it? I think that both of that horror games, horror games are like very, I think, innovative with the jump scares, especially like older ones. I'd say are more innovative with their sort of jump scares like that.
Oh god, yeah. Sound design is a very big thing when it comes to jump scares, but the issue is not knowing to use the sound design for your jump scare. The subtlety from something like Silent Hill is the fact that everything's so dark, everything's so foggy, and there's no introduction to some of these monsters. They just lurk. One of my favourites monster appearances in the entire game is the second appearance of the Abstract Daddy when you're in the hotel. That freaked me out so much when I was younger, because you get past that boss and you think, okay, it's a boss, I'm done. And then he's there. Pyramid Head looking about wasn't too scary, only because he looked like a monk wandering around with a pole. I was just sort of like, you're slow, I can get around you, it's fine. But the first time you see an Abstract Daddy, after knowing how many shots you put into that thing initially, just coming out of that one room after you talk to Laura, and then you go into the hallway, and there's not one, but two Abstract Daddies there, just freaks me out.
And then moving on with gameplay, it's not just combat, is it? There's also puzzles as well in the game. They're quite cryptic at times.
Yeah.
The one that I remember the best was the horseshoe one with the light and the wax. At the time, I had no idea what I was doing at all. I don't know about yourself, but I was like, how do I get out of here? I remember seeing the hatch door and I was like, what do I do here? How do I get the handle? Where is it? And I just couldn't find it. And then eventually I'm thinking, like, put these things together. So it's very cryptic, but I think it's also quite clever at the same time.
I think something that goes really underappreciated now. Downpour brought it back. I'm just going to go on record now and say Downpour's underrated. It's by no means the best game in the franchise, but I think that it deserved a lot more love now than it did back at its release. But Downpour brought back the idea of a difficulty level for riddles and puzzles, and Silent Hill 2 has yet to be beat, in my opinion, in terms of those puzzles. Slapping that difficulty on that puzzle difficulty on hard, and then going back and forth, like the initial one where you're trying to you're trying to gather these objects together, but you're not just trying to do that. You have to pay attention to messages and hard and little descriptions of these items that basically say, look, if you're playing on easy, you just grab these, shove them in a thing, and then it opens up. But on normal, it goes, okay, you do that, but you have to put them in a certain order. And on hard, it's like, okay, you have to do all of that, but we're going to give you a riddle. We're not going to tell you how to do it, but we're going to give you a riddle on how to do it. I think the Hangman...
I was thinking exactly the same one.
Prominent in my head. Like, you bump that difficulty up, and then all of a sudden you're going, wait... okay, who did the fire and who was where, and then you keep running back and forth to 2 rooms. Normal, easy, no problem. Okay, so this riddle clearly tells me that the guy who did the arson is the good guy. Got it. And then you go into hard and it's like, you're all guilty. No one's entirely clear. You're just looking for the least guilty free person. It's like, okay. I'll get around to it eventually. I just came out of like Pyramid Head's den, and you're asking me to do this. Okay, fair enough. That was a labyrinth, and now I'm here.
And do you think another question I had was, do you think the gameplay sort of takes a backseat to the plot? Do you think there's more like focus on environmental horror rather than the combat. Do you think that's the case? Because I've seen other people talk on like YouTube and whatnot about how they return back to sort of like the horror and the gameplay in the third one.
So I think that's what a lot of people. It's completely subjective, but as someone who, as a current media student, genres are very, very important in every form of media, and I think one of the biggest things that people critiquing these things need to understand is that there's not one version of that genre. Horror, for instance, you have so many branches of that, and thriller and horror often get confused.
Yeah.
And I know that people tend to see Silent Hill 2 more as a thriller, but it's definitely more of a horror. Only because a thriller doesn't actively go out of its way to unsettle you. A thriller goes out of its way to make you feel excited, exhilarated by what you're seeing. It gets you intrigued. Silent Hill makes you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It gets under your skin. It doesn't make your heart race in the same way. And I think that the plot and the gameplay go very... It's one of those things where if you take a step back and you have a look at them, they're essentially two different entities.
Yeah.
But I couldn't imagine any other form of gameplay being in this game. Once again, when I talk about attacking, you hold down that button and then you have to stop still, and then wind up an attack or something like that. It's not like any other horror game, like Resident Evil, for example. Whilst I think that the original Resident Evil is a masterclass horror game, you're playing a military man or a military woman in that game. You've got a gun, you don't have to stay still, you can walk around, shoot and all that. Tank controls, yes, but the way you attack and stuff like that is much more appropriate for the character. And I think that's what they were going for here. This gameplay feeds into the horror because you are playing as an everyman. You are an everyman playing this game. If you're in a situation, you're not going to be running about like screaming with like a pipe whacking everything on the head, like no problem. You are going to be cautious. You're going to be looking around your corners. You're going to be making sure that every step in the game counts. And I feel like the tension alone of you actually holding the controller is more than enough to prove that this is a horror game, and the gameplay benefits that.
Definitely. Before I get into the final two sort of like categories I want to get into, is there any other sort of like notes you've got down that you want to sort of talk about before I get into the last two things? Is there anything on your mind right now, or should I get straight into it?
So, the town of Silent Hill itself.
Setting. Yeah.
Like we're probably going to mention it a little bit more when we go into these final two topics, but the town of Silent Hill itself has always been this interesting thing to me, and what's to players of Silent Hill 1 is it messes with them. There's a museum where you go looking for Laura. The first time, once again, referring back to Maria's death in the elevator, but just after that, James sees Laura run off, and then using some bits and bobs that supposedly Laura left behind, you can work out that she's probably gone to a museum. And there's this weird puzzle with a crowbar or a wrench along the way. Anyway, you go to the museum, and then when you get there, you see these pictures, these frames, and when you read about them, they tell you about the history of Silent Hill. But I think that was a lot of people's first... Well, I don't know. But it's the first proper hint that this is individualized. This isn't everyone's viewpoint of Silent Hill. And I think the greatest part about this is as you're going around all these pictures, all these paintings, and you're reading the plaques, eventually you find one in the middle, and then you read it, and it's Pyramid Head standing there with like
hanging bodies, isn't it?
I can't quite remember.
Back.
I think it was like hanging bodies and all that sort of stuff. Now, I might be wrong, but my extensive replaying of the Silent Hill franchise more recently, I believe there was a similar painting in the first one, but Pyramid Head wasn't there. So the idea is that the outlook of the world is entirely individualized, and once again you can go back to the idea of these characters seeing the world in like flames or ice cold meat lockers everywhere and all this sort of thing. That would be slightly entertaining if there was just meat lockers everywhere somehow. But the idea of this town changing, like I remember the first time I played this game and I was lost. The first time I did Silent Hill, I was stumped. Because you have to get the apartment key, and I had no idea where the apartment key was because I was only informed I needed to get to an apartment, and then you wander around every single corner and it's like, bloody hell, where does the road go? And it's only when you go through that central alleyway and you find the key at the end of it that it's like, okay, I know where I'm going now. But that gives you an indication that the town is as much of a character as these characters itself. And I think it's really underappreciated. I think that if you go into Silent Hill on a replay, something that a lot of people should do more often, once again on a replay, is pay more attention to the way the town communicates with the player rather than the characters. Yes, there's this big series of different character arcs and plots going on, but the actual town itself is telling you a story without having to use these characters. You can remove every single character from this game and just be like a ghost wandering about this town, and there's still so much there that I think goes underappreciated. It's not just a set piece, it's not just this haunted area, it's a character. And that's pretty much
I was literally about to say Silent Hill as a town itself is a character. It's so sort of like with the lore, with the whole town and everything, and how it's so mysterious, and it's giving people their own sort of like visions, and it's sort of like punishing them and doing all this. It's such a good, interesting concept for a setting that's also a character in itself. Also like the decision to sort of back in the PS1 era, they used the fog because it was sort of a limitation on the PS1's sort of like hard drive and its graphics and what it could like do. The decision to bring it back, they didn't have to do that, did they? They brought it back because they know how much it gives to the town. The
PS2 could have very easily loaded in these areas.
Yeah.
I mean, look no further than like Grand Theft Auto for an example of that. But the idea to bring the fog back was a very good idea. It's weird because the fog was used to render and load things in the original game, and in Silent Hill 2 it's elevators. And I don't know why, but I always found that humorous. I used to, when I was younger, I used to have a stopwatch, and I used to like go, there's something off about this elevator, just timing it, looking at the stopwatch, and then by the time you get out, it's like, it's different this time. But that's because it's loading in towns and sections of this area and all that. Even when you're jumping down and down and down, it's loading each area in so much to the point that by the time you get to that, it can be big and sprawling. I'd agree.
And the second to last topic I was sort of wanted to talk about was sort of like memorable moments. So do you sort of have any memorable moments that sort of stand out to you that you remember, like off the bat of the... Like, you've obviously played it recently, so you'll obviously have a better memory than me, but I have two in mind. But do you have sort of any that you want to share that got, maybe it's like a horror that got you, or something like that, like a scare or something?
So the first two scenes of Angela are always going to stick out in my head. I don't think they're ever going to leave. Angela and the knife. That's going to be one of the most haunting scenes I think that you can ever put in a game like this. And we currently live in an age where when people talk about mental health or anything to do with suicide and depression, it's overhanded. And I don't think that's because it's not talked about. I'm sorry, rephrase that. I don't think that's because it's talked about too much. Rather, I think that a lot of people are using it more as a what's the word? They're using it as they're using it as the entire canvas. They're trying to get people aware about it, but they're using it as sort of like, here's a card, and then it says, I have this mental health problem. Whereas Silent Hill uses the idea of mental health and depression to paint its pictures, not to frame them.
Yeah.
We're not looking at we're not looking at a character who's screaming and shouting over and over and over again that they want to kill themselves, that they want it to be over. But Angela is, in one single scene, sways about 3 or 4 times between wanting to use the knife and not wanting to. She hands it over to James, and even in that one scene you can tell how fragile it is, because she's completely forgotten she's handed the knife over and thinks that she's threatening him. She's automatically gone back to a child. She's reverted back, and it's this moment of pure realism in a game where people talk about hokey voice acting, and where it may not be scary to the same degrees that most people would deem horror games to be. There is so much thought put into this. It's not a game. It's not a game that can 100% be appreciated if you're going into it as if you were reading a book or watching a film. If you're there seeking to consume it, but it's a game that is built for, well, that has been crafted for people that love to look into this stuff. Because the more you look into it, the more you might find yourself regretting it. I mean, like, even later on when you see Angela again, she's the most vocal she's ever been on the stairs, and that entire scene where she is clearly dodging the topic, but she is so certain of herself this time, and that is the true horror of a character arc. Normally you see see a game or a film where it would talk about something like suicide, and you would think to yourself, oh, okay, so by the end of it they're either actually going to kill themselves or they're going to think about it. It's perfectly and intentionally left ambiguous here, because the horror is not knowing. The horror is this character is completely believable in performing either of these acts. She gets to a point where it's like, oh, if she just had a friend, she could totally come out of this, but there's no one else here. There's no one else to take that on board. So when she walks away, it's I remember that was one of the moments that stuck with me more than any other scene in the game.
For me, it's more of like a sort of like gameplay moment, less of a plot moment. One thing that sticks out to me, I can't remember which setting it's in. It might be in the hospital, but it's in the elevator. I don't know if you remember the game show, sort of like quiz show sort of thing that you have.
The game show, yeah. Maria in the hospital.
When you're with Maria in the elevator, it's so out of place. It's so freaky. It breaks the fourth wall, but I think it's brilliant, and it's so weird. I can't sort of like explain it. So if you don't know what it is, it's sort of like you get into this elevator, and then all of a sudden you just hear like this sort of like game show host, and you hear like the audience in the background cheering, and you hear them clapping, and you hear him just say, mention your name, James, like, who the hell is this guy, how does he know my name? And that creeped me out so much. In the HD remaster, they sort of like they screwed it up. They changed the voice actor, but in the original, it's so odd.
Yeah, it's made to be almost like a person who's being forced to do it in the original, whereas in the remastered version, it's more like he's a game show host. Like, he's actually like a modern TV host, which is alright, but it doesn't work too much for it. Playing the HD remaster just to look at how patched it's been recently, the original voice actors have been inserted back in, so It makes it an easier experience, and the graphical quality overall has been vastly improved. And I mean, like, if you haven't played Silent Hill 2 and you wanted an easy way to access it, I can totally recommend this version now. But the PS2 version, it's more to do with, like, you know, you don't need to up-res or sharpen up the model qualities to play a game like this and go, oh, that's better. It's like, it was great the way it was. All they need to do was port it over. But Konami's Konami. They're going to look for cheap change in your pocket, whatever they can.
Definitely. And then I had one other one. It was in the prison. Again, we're going back to the prison, but I don't even remember this. There's like a prisoner. You go past all the jail cells, the prison cells. You go past them all, and then there's just one you go past, and your radio starts going off, and then you hear this sort of like demonic voice saying, I think it says ritual or something like that. And it says it. So again, it says it caught me off guard. Again, just like the elevator scene with the game show, the quiz show thing. You can't see this enemy.
That's a great.
Yeah, you can only hear them.
That's a great indicator of, like, I know a lot of people look at something like Silent Hill 4 and go, ghosts in Silent Hill, that's impossible. But there are definitely great seeds to in previous games that place a lot of these things around. Like, for example, you can see Silent Hill and Silent Hill 2 as completely separate entries, but you know, people look at Silent Hill 1 and go, but that wasn't a version of Purgatory. That wasn't inside Harry's head. But you know, you go back and you have a look at his personality, and you can sort of buy it. You can make that connection if you really wanted to. So the idea of, like, oh, there have never been ghosts in Silent Hill, and then you pay attention to small scenes like that in Silent Hill 2, and it's like, you know, if you really wanted to, you can make the excuse that something like that happens. I still think that, you know, Fatal Frame's going to take the cake for any creepy ghost in my day, but Silent Hill 2 definitely does some really freaky stuff with its audio. 2 and 3 especially have one moment in each game that will never not scare the shit out of me. 3 does it a bit better, but 2 still has a moment like this, where if you go into an optional room at one point and you're just rooting around, there'll be nothing there, you will hear, and especially if you've got earphones in, you will hear knocking. As realistic as anything else on the planet, right behind you.
No.
And my mind was like, shit, there's someone at the door. And I fucking jumped because it sounded like someone was punching it in. It was so real. And I think it's like, Silent Hill thrives on the small moments rather than trying to be big and grand. And I you know, if you want big and grand, you've got Resident Evil. If you really wanted your epic survival horror moments, but Silent Hill works in a more subtle way.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's why it makes moments like the prison scene so powerful.
Definitely. And then the last topic I want to sort of talk about is the endings for the game. So there's obviously a multitude of endings. There's the dog ending, which is so weird, and I don't know how people found it in the first place. It's such like a weird way to get to it. And then there's also like
the UFO ending
as well, yeah, and then
like
so out of place. But
what's it? Leaving and
Leave. There's like suicide in water, suicide one, and then there's like another one as well. The one with Maria.
Yeah, there's like a Maria. That's it. It's just called Maria, I think.
So what would your sort of personal favourite ending be? Mine would sort of be the Leave ending, but I don't know what yours would be. What do you think fits most with James and his character? What do you think is like the best way to go out for him?
Definitely the dog ending. No, so to be fair though, that took me so off guard when I played it against like the doghouse in the middle of nowhere. Okay, I was in there before, I'm sure, but I think that the Leave and In Water endings are always going to be people's favourites because they are a lot more story based. But what's and the Team Silent themselves made sure to leave it ambiguous which one's
Yeah,
canon.
definitely. Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes these endings so much more special, because if you were following through a normal story, like a much more modern survival horror story, and we were doing something like this, the leave ending I feel like would be a lot more appropriate to today. But the in water ending is always going to be something that a lot of people are going to feel a little bit more strongly towards, because of how out of nowhere it not out of nowhere necessarily, but how sudden it is, and it's one of those things where the beauty of leave and in water endings, the beauty of them is they both work.
Yeah.
I tried to get the in water ending on my last playthrough, just because I was like, I need to refresh my memory on this one. I remember it from a while back, but I need to go back and refresh it. But the beautiful thing is, this is the game about interpretation once again. Purgatory, it's all through the character's mindset and the eyes, but the thing is, you're never going to 100% have a grasp on what they're properly thinking. So when I was going through everything, like, you go to like the tape recorder, you listen to the full conversation, you make sure to not heal yourself often and all this sort of stuff. But I still got the leave ending, and I was fine with it, because even though James is hearing so much more abuse if you're going through the in water ending, and that includes after looking at Angela's knife as well. But after receiving so much abuse and looking at all these terrible things, you could totally buy it as like the complete opposite. You could totally buy him listening to all this abuse, thinking about this entire thing, going, this isn't me, I'm not in this place anymore, I need to move past it. And like, if he looks at the knife, for instance, you could see as he's not looking at it because he wants to kill himself. He's looking at the knife because he's thinking, this is someone who I was beforehand. I don't want to be that person anymore. Same with the pyramid heads at the end, when he's going to fight the two pyramid heads, and he goes, you are my punishers and I don't need you anymore. You could totally see that as like, yes, in water ending he doesn't need them anymore because he's going to punish himself, but he doesn't need them anymore because he's accepted it. The idea of like James's story being apparent to the player before James himself, so by the time he sits down and puts in that VHS tape and he's watching him kill his wife, and he's come to accept the fact that he's done it now. That last bit of the game, right before the very end, he's blaming himself over and over and over again for his wife's death, and you think he's done a bad thing, of course. And then when he has that final conversation with Mary before going up to,
you go through that corridor, are you? Is it the corridor?
Yeah, no, sorry, not that bit. It's a section where he's talking with her on the bed.
Yeah.
That section when he's talking to her, going, I killed you because I hate you and all that sort of stuff. You could totally buy that the entire time James is only saying this as an excuse to feel guilty. He killed her out of mercy. You can believe that. He killed her because he hated her. You can believe that. Both interpretations are exactly that, interpretations. They're so open. There isn't any... There's evidence towards both points, and the best part about these evidence, these pieces of evidence, is that you can totally pick one up from the he killed his wife out of hate and put it into the mercy column or something like that. It works all overall. And that's why both In Water and Leave endings work so well. Personally, for myself, I'm a sucker. We got Laura in the town.
Yeah.
I don't want to by herself.
Yeah.
So the Leave ending is more in line with something that I'm going to be for. But I can understand why the In Water ending is just as powerful.
And also, I think with the Leave ending, why I think it was so good is because it's more promising, it's more positive. I think James also deserves a release after all this he's been through. He's gone through so much in this game. I think he deserves it in the end, personally. I also think with Mary's letter as well, it's sort of soul crushing at the end. Do you remember the voice actor?
Oh God, yeah.
It's so soul crushing. If you're in both sort of settings like you talk about there, the Leave one and the In Water one. With the In Water one, it feels a lot more soul crushing and so much more disheartening. Whereas with the Leave ending, it's a lot more sort of promising, and you know that he's obviously going to move on.
I think with the Leave ending, the beauty of it is that yes, it's promising, but it's not a good ending that's trying to be a good ending.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not like going this is the definitive ending because everything is happy. It's not all happy. The first part of the letter, and I think that's what got me the most is when you realise that James neglected to accept his wife's death, so convince himself his wife was still alive in Silent Hill. And that's very much in line with the rest of the game, which is why an ending like Leave works. It's like, oh, you can't have James leave and be happy. It's a Silent Hill game. Everyone has to be sad and miserable. It's like, yes, but you have to remember that that if you recall the opening, he tricked himself into this. This entire event of Silent Hill dragging him in was of his own doing, and I feel like the reason why James can leave and why he has the permission to leave is because Silent Hill is a town where you either learn from your mistakes or learn from your mistakes and leave and become a better person, or never learn like Eddie and Angela and are forced to stay in the town forever, whether that be through death or through madness. They're still, like, they didn't learn one bit. Angela never learned to move on as her own person, constantly relying on other people, even though her father sexually abused her. And that bit with Angela as well, the fact that you can find that news article right outside the Abstract Daddy room, and you read it and you go, oh, so the dad killed the wife, and then Angela witnessed this and then went to kill the dad, and that's why all of this shit's happened. She's in Silent Hill because she's running away, but she's still running away at the end of the game. She hasn't learned past that. After you've killed the Abstract Daddy, she runs from James. She's not willing to trust anyone ever again. She's not willing to believe in anyone. Therefore, she hasn't learned a lesson. She hasn't learned that what she did was still wrong. And with Eddie, he completely embodied his own lie. He believed that he went so far as to say, oh, I didn't do it. I didn't kill these people. To the point where he went, I did kill these people. But instead of feeling morose for these people, instead of feeling bad, he embraced it. He became his own monster, and that's why he couldn't leave. So I feel like, you know, James learning his lesson gives him permission to leave.
Yeah.
And also, Laura's an innocent girl wandering about an empty town. I'd feel really weird if James just picked up the body of Mary or Maria and then
just left her there,
jumped into a river whilst Laura's just like watching from the hospital going, oh, what the fuck do I do now?
I feel that's a good way to end it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for sort of listening to the first episode of the Co-op Chat podcast. Next episode, I think we want to do Silent Hill 3. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm completely up for that.
Great. You can follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Adams21, and Scott, where can they find you?
You can follow me on Twitter as well at Dusky_Snow, and my YouTube channel Dusky Snow.
And that's great. Thanks everyone for listening to the first episode, the sort of pilot episode of the Co-op Chat podcast.